They wore their finest black mourning clothes and dabbed at dry eyes, painting a perfect portrait of grieving devotion. But beneath the expensive wool lay a greed so deep it had rotted their souls. I'm Rachel Carter, the judge presiding over their claim. As they testified about family loyalty, I didn't see love. I saw the snow swirling against a windshield 20 years ago, the night they left me on a curb to chase an inheritance. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Now the court is finally in session. The air in probate courtroom 4 always smelled of lemon oil dust and the stale anxiety of people waiting for money. It was a scent I had come to find comforting. I sat high above the gallery, the heavy oak bench serving as both my pedestal and my fortress. To the attorneys shuffling papers below, I was the Honorable Rachel Carter, a woman of 29 who had risen through the circuit with terrifying speed. They called me brilliant, though I knew the whispers in the hallways were less kind. They called me cold. They said I had a heart like a metronome, ticking perfectly relentlessly and without feeling. They were not entirely wrong. I adjusted the sleeves of my robe. It was heavy black and suffocating, but I preferred it to my own skin. Inside the robe, I was the law. The law does not weep. The law does not tremble. The law deals in facts, statutes, and evidence. In this room, intentions meant nothing unless they were written in ink and notarized. I had built my life around this certainty. I had constructed a world of logic to keep the chaos of human emotion at bay. The bailiff, a kindly older man named Thomas, placed the morning docket in front of me. I picked up my pen, a heavy brass instrument that felt like a weapon in my hand, and scanned the list of the day's hearings. Estate of Harrison, estate of Kowalski, estate of Agatha Thorne. My pen stopped. The ink bled slightly into the paper, forming a tiny black Rorschach test. Beneath the name of the deceased were the names of the petitioners, the people contesting the will, Robert Miller and Ellen Miller. The courtroom seemed to tilt on its axis. The hum of the HVAC unit roared in my ears like a gale force wind. I had not seen those names in print for 20 years. I had not spoken them aloud for even longer. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and the smell of lemon oil vanished. Suddenly, I smelled pine needles and wood smoke. It was Christmas Eve 2 decades ago. I was 9 years old. The living room of our small rental house was warmer than usual. The heat blasted high to combat the blizzard raging outside. The tree was lit, casting a soft multicolored glow on the beige carpet. It should have been a night of anticipation of stockings and cider. Instead, there was a suitcase standing by the front door. It was my suitcase. My mother, Ellen, was kneeling before me. She was buttoning my coat with frantic, clumsy fingers. She wouldn't look me in the eye. "It isn't forever, Rachel," she said, her voice tight. "You have to understand the situation. We've explained it to you." "I can be quiet," I whispered. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. "I promise I won't make a sound." My father, Robert, paced the room behind her. He was checking his watch, then peering out the window at the snow. "The roads are getting worse, Elle. We have to go. If we don't get there before 10, the matron will lock the doors." "But why?" I asked again, the question pathetic and small. My father turned to me. He didn't look angry. He looked burdened, as if my existence were a tax he could no longer afford to pay. "Because Aunt Agatha is coming," he said, as if that explained everything. "She is dying, Rachel. Her heart is failing. She has millions of dollars, millions, and she is leaving it all to whoever takes care of her in her final days. She hates noise, My mother added, finally looking at me. Her eyes were dry. She detests children. She says they are sticky and loud. If she arrives and finds a child here, she leaves. And if she leaves, we get nothing. Do you understand? We lose everything. I won't be sticky, I pleaded. It's a risk we can't take, my father snapped. Grab the bag. The drive was a blur of darkness and the rhythmic thwack hiss of the windshield wipers fighting the sleet. I sat in the back seat, my hands tucked under my thighs to stop them from shaking. The car was cold. The heater was broken on the passenger side, and neither of them spoke. The silence in that sedan was heavier than the snow piling up on the roadside. They weren't taking me to a relative's house. We had no other family. They were taking me to St. Jude's, a boarding house, 2 towns over, that took in wards of the state and hardship cases. When the car stopped, the building loomed over us, gray and jagged against the black sky. It looked like a prison disguised as a sanctuary. My father popped the trunk. He set my suitcase on the wet pavement. I stood there, the sleet stinging my cheeks, waiting for them to change their minds. I waited for my mother to realize that no amount of money was worth this, leaving her only child on a curb in the middle of a storm. She rolled down the window just an inch. "Don't look at me like that, Rachel," she said. Her voice was muffled by the glass and the wind. "We are doing this for your future. When she passes, we'll all be rich. You'll thank us then. You'll have everything you ever wanted." "I want to go home," I said. "This is necessary," she replied. "Be a good girl." The window rolled up. The taillights flared red, staining the snow like blood, and then they faded into the white swirl of the storm. They didn't look back. They drove away toward a fortune that was more important to them than the terrified girl shivering in her coat. I stood there until my toes went numb, clutching the handle of my suitcase, realizing for the first time that love was conditional, and I had failed to meet the terms. "Your Honor," the voice brought me back to the bench. Thomas the bailiff was looking at me with concern. My hand was gripping the pen so tightly my knuckles were white. I exhaled slowly, forcing the memory back into the iron box where I kept it. I was not that 9-year-old girl anymore. I was the judge, and I had a job to do. "I am ready, Thomas," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't sound like the voice of a daughter. It sounded like the voice of the state. "Call the next case." "Calling the matter of the estate of Agatha Thorne," Thomas bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a heavy creak. 2 figures walked in. Time is a cruel sculptor. It had chipped away at Robert and Ellen Miller, leaving them jagged and worn. My father, once a man who carried himself with the arrogance of assumed wealth, now walked with a stoop. His suit was expensive charcoal wool, but it hung loosely on his frame, as if he had shrunk inside it. My mother walked beside him. Her hair, once a vibrant blonde, was brittle and dyed a harsh, flat yellow. She clutched a designer handbag that looked decades old, her knuckles knotty with arthritis. Their faces were etched with deep lines, not laugh lines, but the vertical furrows of chronic dissatisfaction. They looked like people who had spent 20 years holding their breath. They walked down the center aisle, their eyes fixed hungrily on the opposing counsel's table where the executor of the estate sat. They did not look up at the bench. They did not look at the flag. And they certainly did not look at me. To them, the judge was just a fixture of the room, a piece of furniture that dispensed rulings. They had no idea that the woman sitting 6 feet above them, peering through thick corrective lenses, was the investment they had discarded in the snow. They reached the plaintiff's table and sat down. My father's hands were trembling, a tremor of greed or perhaps fear. My mother smoothed her skirt, composing her face into a mask of pious grief. I opened the file in front of me. Counsel, I said, my tone flat and unrecognizable. You may proceed. The attorney representing my parents stood up. He was a small, damp man named Mr. Sterling, wearing a polyester suit that had seen better decades. He shuffled his papers with a nervousness that suggested he hadn't been paid in advance. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice a reedy tenor that grated against the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. We are here to contest the validity of the last will and testament of Agatha Thorne. My clients, Robert and Ellen Miller, are the sole surviving kin of the deceased. They dedicated the last 20 years of their lives to her care, acting as her primary guardians, her confidants, and her family. I watched them from the height of the bench. My face remained a mask of porcelain and glass, but beneath the robe my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. I remembered those hands. I remembered them steering a sled, carving a turkey, and finally lifting a suitcase out of a trunk and setting it on wet pavement. Now they shook with a tremor that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with desperation. Proceed, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too deep, too calm. It was the voice of the court, not the voice of Rachel. Sterling cleared his throat. We intend to prove that the deceased was suffering from undue influence and diminished capacity when she drafted her final will. We intend to show that my clients who sacrificed their own livelihoods and comfort were verbally promised the estate on numerous occasions. I shifted my gaze to my mother. Ellen Miller was nodding along to the lawyer's speech, her expression a practiced tableau of martyrdom. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was a performance. I knew her performances well. I had been the audience for them for 9 years before I was written out of the script. Mr. Sterling, I interrupted. The room fell silent. The estate in question, what is the valuation? Sterling fumbled with a document. Appraised at $3.2 million, Your Honor, including the manor house, the bonds, and the jewelry. $3.2 million. I saw the reaction in my parents. At the mention of the number, my father's head snapped up. His eyes didn't hold grief, they held a starving feral hunger. My mother stopped dabbing her eyes and licked her lips. It was a subtle, predatory movement. They weren't here for justice. They were here because their gamble was supposed to pay off. They had traded a daughter for a lottery ticket 20 years ago, and they were terrified that the ticket was a loser. And you claim, I continued, keeping my eyes on the lawyer, but my attention on them, that the deceased promised this sum to them? Explicitly, Your Honor, Sterling said. They gave up everything for her. They moved into her home. They cooked her meals. They endured her difficult temperament. She was a saint, my father blurted out. I turned my gaze to him. It was the first time I had looked him directly in the face in 2 decades. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? He was looking for a 9-year-old girl in a hand-me-down coat, not a woman in judicial robes with severe hair and a voice like flint. Mr. Miller, I said, you are not under oath yet, but you wish to state for the record that Agatha Thorne was a saint. She was, he lied, his voice trembling with false reverence. A difficult woman, yes, but a saint. We loved her dearly. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. Agatha Thorne was a monster. Everyone in the family knew it. She was a cruel, vindictive woman who used her money as a truncheon to beat her relatives into submission. My parents had spent my entire childhood whispering about how much they despised her, how they couldn't wait for her to die so they could cash in. Now she was a saint. The lie hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Let us dispense with the opening theatrics, I said, leaning back. The leather chair creaked a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. I want to hear from the petitioners directly. Mr. Sterling, sit down. The lawyer looked relieved to be silenced. He sank into his chair. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I said, stand up. They rose in unison like obedient schoolchildren. I pulled the heavy ledger closer to me. This was irregular procedure. Judges usually let the lawyers dance around the truth for hours, but I had the discretion to interrogate witnesses in probate matters, and I intended to use it. I needed to know who they were now. I needed to know if there was anything left of the parents I had once loved, or if the rot had consumed them entirely. State your names for the record, I commanded. Robert Miller, Ellen Miller. You claim you have been the sole caretakers of Agatha Thorne for 20 years. I stated, reading from the file I already knew by heart. Yes, Your Honor, my mother said. Her voice was sugary, a cloying tone she used to use when asking neighbors for favors. Day and night. We haven't taken a vacation in, I can't remember. We couldn't leave her alone. A significant sacrifice, I noted, keeping my tone neutral. To dedicate one's life to the care of an elderly relative, it requires a certain flexibility. We were happy to do it, my father said, straightening his tie. He was gaining confidence now, thinking he was charming me. Family comes first, Your Honor. That is the code we live by. Family comes first. The words hit me like a physical blow. I tightened my grip on my pen until the metal barrel bit into my skin. Let's discuss the logistics of that care, I said. Agatha Thorne's estate is large, a manor house. To maintain such a property and care for an invalid, that must have required all of your time. It did, Ellen sighed. Every waking moment. And your household, I pressed. Who else lived in the manor with you during these 20 years? They exchanged a glance, a quick nervous flicker of eyes. Just us, Your Honor, Robert said. And Agatha, of course. I paused. I let the silence stretch out, forcing them to stand in it. Just you. You were a young couple when you moved in. Surely a house of that size, there was room for a family. This was the trap. I watched my mother carefully. I watched the corners of her mouth, the way her hands twisted the strap of her handbag. We have no children, Ellen said. She didn't hesitate. She didn't stumble. The denial was smooth, polished like a stone found in a river. No children, I asked, pushing harder. By choice. Agatha required a quiet environment, Robert interjected, eager to bolster their narrative of sacrifice. She had a delicate constitution. She couldn't abide the chaos of a family. So we made the choice to remain childless, to dedicate ourselves fully to her needs. I see, I said. I wrote childless on my notepad. I underlined it twice, the pen tearing through the paper. So, to be clear, you sacrificed the possibility of parenthood for the sake of your aunt's comfort? We did, Ellen said, lifting her chin. She looked proud of this lie. She looked noble. It was a heartbreak, of course. Every woman dreams of being a mother. But duty called. I looked at the woman who had buttoned my coat while I cried. I looked at the woman who had promised she would come back for me, then vanished for 20 years. She wasn't just lying to the court. She was erasing me. To acknowledge me would be to admit to Agatha's executor that they had violated the aunt's one rule. To acknowledge me would endanger the money, so I did not exist. I was an inconvenience they had discarded, and now I was a footnote they were deleting. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing the anger into something harder, sharper. You speak of duty, I said, my voice dropping an octave. And you speak of affection. You claim you loved her. We did, they chorused. And yet, I said, picking up a document from the file, a medical report. The attending physician noted that in her final days, Agatha was in significant pain. She was often alone in her room for hours at a time. We have to sleep, Your Honor. Robert snapped, his facade cracking slightly. We aren't machines. Mr. Miller, lower your voice, I warned. I am simply trying to establish the nature of this relationship. You say you loved her. You say you sacrificed your potential family for her. I leaned forward over the bench. The heavy oak felt cool under my forearms. Do you have any regrets, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller? Looking back on 20 years of servitude, of erasing your own lives for a woman you claim was a saint? Do you regret any of it? I wanted them to say yes. I wanted a moment of humanity. I wanted them to say, we regret losing our daughter. Even if they didn't say my name, I wanted to see the ghost of me in their eyes. My mother looked at my father. Then she looked back at me, her face hardening into a mask of pure avarice. My only regret, Your Honor, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is that poor Agatha suffered for so long. For her own peace, of course. We only wish she had passed sooner. There it was, the truth wrapped in a shroud of fake sympathy. They wished she had died years ago so they could have stopped acting and started spending. Sooner, I repeated, for her peace. Exactly, Robert said. It was hard watching her linger. I looked down at my notepad. I had written, childless. Beneath it I wrote greed, the hope I had harbored, a tiny foolish ember that perhaps they had missed me, that perhaps they had suffered in my absence, was extinguished. They were not victims of circumstance. They were parasites. They had drained Agatha's life, and now they wanted to consume her bones. I closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the courtroom. The court has heard enough testimony regarding your devotion, I said. We will proceed to the reading of the will. I signaled to the bailiff. My face was calm, but inside, I was preparing to burn their world to the ground. They had come here for a fortune, expecting a rubber stamp from a stranger. They had no idea that the stranger holding the gavel was the daughter they had sacrificed to get here. Mr. Sterling, I said, you may sit. Executor, please approach the bench. The executor, a somber man named Mr. Henderson, with a face like a crumpled paper bag, approached the bench. He carried a leather portfolio that looked older than I was. He did not look at my parents. He looked tired, the way men look when they are burdened with the secrets of the dead. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, humid tension of the room. Please read the last will and testament of Agatha Thorne into the record. My parents leaned forward in unison. It was a grotesque, synchronized movement, like two vultures spotting a carcass on the highway. My father's knee was bouncing under the table, a rapid, nervous jackhammering that shook the water pitcher. My mother had stopped feigning tears. Her eyes were dry-wide and fixated on the leather portfolio. This was the moment they had sold their souls for. This was the payoff for 20 years of humiliation. Henderson cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and unfolded a heavy document. I, Agatha Thorne, he began, his voice dry and reedy, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. He paused to turn the page. The sound of the paper turning was deafening. My mother held her breath. Article 3. Distribution of assets. Henderson read, to the estate, which includes the property known as Thorn Manor, the investment portfolio held at First National and all liquid assets, jewelry, and personal effects. My father licked his lips. He was already spending it. I could see it in his eyes. The new car, the vacation, the debts wiped clean. He looked at the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, and gave a small, arrogant nod. I hereby leave the entirety of said estate. Henderson hesitated. He looked up from the paper, glancing briefly at the petitioner's table with an expression that might have been pity or perhaps amusement. To the Sunny Meadows Feline Sanctuary and Rescue. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenography machine. The bailiff froze, then the explosion happened. What? My father whispered. The word came out like a hiss of steam. The Sunny Meadows Feline Sanctuary. Henderson repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. For the care and housing of stray cats? No, my mother said. She stood up slowly, her face draining of color until it was the shade of old ash. No, that's a mistake. Read it again. It is not a mistake, Mrs. Miller, Henderson said. It is quite clear. It's a fraud, Robert Miller roared. He surged to his feet, his chair clattering backward and hitting the floor with a violent crash. That witch, that senile, spiteful old witch, she promised us, she looked me in the eye and said we would be taken care of. Mr. Miller, sit down. I ordered, though I did not reach for the gavel yet. I wanted to see this. I wanted to see the mask fall. I will not sit down, he screamed, turning to face the gallery, though there was no one there but a few bored clerks. We gave her 20 years. We cleaned her bedpans. We cooked her meals. We listened to her insults day after day. We ruined our lives for her. My mother shrieked, her voice cracking into a high, jagged sob. She wasn't crying for Agatha. She was crying for the money. We gave up everything. We have nothing. She can't leave it to cats. She's a monster, a wretched, hateful hag. She was a saint 5 minutes ago, Mrs. Miller, I said calmly. She was the devil. My mother spat, turning toward the bench, her eyes wild. The sugary sweetness was gone, peeled away to reveal the raw, ugly selfishness beneath. She laughed at us. She knew. She knew we were waiting, and she laughed at us from the grave. This will is a forgery, Robert shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Henderson. You wrote this. You stole our money. The will was notarized and video recorded. Mr. Miller, Henderson said, stepping back from the railing. Agatha was quite specific. She said, and I quote from her instructions, I would rather my fortune buy tuna for strays than champagne for sycophants. Sycophants? Robert looked ready to vault the barrier. We are her family. We are her flesh and blood. And yet, I said, my voice rising above the din, she seemed to prefer the company of animals. Because she was insane, Robert yelled. Diminished capacity. We told you she didn't know what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing, I said. I picked up the gavel and brought it down. Bang! The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot, severing their hysteria. Order, I said. Order in this court, or I will have you both removed in handcuffs. The threat of arrest penetrated their rage. Robert stood panting, his face a mottled purple. Ellen was gripping the table, her fingernails digging into the wood. They looked like shipwreck survivors watching the rescue boat sail away. Sit down, I commanded. Slowly, resentfully, they sank back into their chairs. My father righted his overturned chair with a defiant shove. The court accepts the validity of the will, I said. You can't. Sterling, their lawyer, squeaked. Your Honor, it's unconscionable. However, I said, cutting him off, there is another document. The room went still again. My parents looked up. The desperation in their eyes was pathetic. It was the look of a gambler who has lost his house but thinks he sees a quarter on the floor. A document, Robert asked, his voice hoarse. A codicil, I said. A holographic amendment handwritten by the deceased found inside her personal Bible 2 days after her death. It was submitted to the court this morning. I held up the piece of paper. It was yellowed, the handwriting spidery and shaky. Does it overturn the cat sanctuary? Ellen asked, hope bleeding into her voice. It addresses a specific distribution of assets, I said. Agatha Thorne was a meticulous woman. She knew her family better than they knew themselves. She anticipated this moment. I adjusted my glasses. I looked down at the paper, though I had already memorized every loop and curve of the ink. I will read the codicil, I announced. My parents leaned in again. The cycle of greed was instant. They had just called her a devil, and now they were praying to her again. To my niece Rachel, I read. I paused. I looked up. Confusion rippled across my parents' faces. It was genuine confusion. They frowned, looking at each other, then back at me, then at their lawyer. What? Robert said. Who? To my niece Rachel, I repeated, enunciating every syllable. Whom I never met but watched from afar. To the child who was cast out so that others could creep in. There must be a mistake, Ellen said, shaking her head rapidly. We don't. Agatha didn't have a niece. We are her only family. The codicil continues, I said, ignoring her. I leave the contents of my personal safe deposit box key enclosed to Rachel. I do this because she is the only member of this bloodline who understands the value of earning one's place in the world. Your Honor, Robert interrupted, standing up again, his hands spread in a gesture of bewildered frustration. This is clearly a fabrication. We have no niece. We have no children. We told you we remain childless to care for Agatha. You have no niece? I asked. No, he shouted. Agatha had no other siblings. We are it. And you have no daughter? I asked. The question hung in the air. No, he said firmly. We have no daughter. It was the final nail. They had denied me in the past to save their future, and now confronted with my name, they denied me again to save their pride. They had buried the memory of me so deep that they couldn't even dig it up when it might have saved them. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold, hard resolution. The last tether that bound me to them, the tiny irrational hope that they might acknowledge me, snapped. Bailiff, I said softly, please place the codicil into evidence. I reached up and took off my glasses. I unpinned the severe bun at the nape of my neck. I didn't let my hair fall loose, that would be too dramatic, but I loosened the tension that pulled my face tight. I looked at them. I really looked at them. I looked at my mother's eyes. They were the same shade of blue as mine. I looked at my father's chin. It was the same cleft I saw in the mirror every morning. Look at me, I said. My voice was no longer the voice of the court. It was the voice of the girl who had stood in the snow. They frowned. They squinted. Look at me, I repeated. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, look closely. Ellen tilted her head. Her brow furrowed. She looked at my eyes. I saw the spark of recognition ignite a tiny, terrifying flicker. Rachel, she whispered. It was barely a breath. You told the court you have no daughter, I said. But you left a 9-year-old girl at St. Jude's boarding house on Christmas Eve 20 years ago. You told her to be quiet. You told her you were doing it for her future. Robert went pale. He stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the table for support. He looked from me to the empty space where he thought his daughter had vanished. That's impossible, he stammered. Rachel she's gone. She was what, what, Miller? I asked. Conveniently misplaced, erased. You're the judge, Ellen said, her voice rising in disbelief. You can't be her. You're the Honorable Rachel Carter. I said. I am Rachel Carter. I took my grandmother's maiden name the day I turned 18 because I couldn't bear to carry yours. The silence in the courtroom now was different. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a grave being opened. The horror on their faces was total. It wasn't shame. They weren't sorry they had done it. They were terrified because the power dynamic had just shifted so violently. It had broken the axis of their world. They realized in that freezing moment that the person holding the gavel was the person they had thrown away. You said you did it for my future, I said, leaning over the bench, my voice cold enough to freeze the water in the pitcher. Well, here I am. I have a future. I am the presiding judge of the probate court. I paused, letting the weight of my position crush them. And I am the sole arbiter of the fortune you sold me to acquire. The courtroom descended into a silence so profound I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the breathless quiet of a trap springing shut. My parents stared at me. Their mouths hung open slack with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. For 20 years, I had been an abstraction to them, a loose end they had snipped off and forgotten. Now I was the blade poised over their necks. Ellen was the first to move. Her instinct for self-preservation, always sharper than her conscience, kicked in. She took a step toward the railing, her hands reaching out as if she wanted to embrace me. The bailiff Thomas stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt, effectively blocking her path. Rachel, she breathed. Her voice cracked, then pitched higher into a frantic pleading tone. Rachel, darling, is it really you? Sit down, Mrs. Miller, I said. My voice was ice. But you're our daughter, she cried, ignoring the order. Oh, thank God, we didn't know where you went, we looked for you. You left me at St. Jude's with a suitcase and a promise you never kept. I corrected her. You didn't look for me. You erased me. No, Robert chimed in, finding his voice. He wiped sweat from his upper lip, his eyes darting between me and the exit. You don't understand the pressure we were under. Agatha was a tyrant. We did it for you, Rachel. We wanted to secure your inheritance. We knew she would cut us all off if she saw a child in the house. It was a strategy, a sacrifice. A sacrifice, I repeated. Yes, you sacrificed me. To give you this, Ellen gestured wildly at the courtroom, as if my judicial robes were a gift they had wrapped for me. Look at you. You're a judge, you're successful. If we had kept you in that house, Agatha would have made you miserable. We saved you from her. I watched them scramble. It was pathetic. They were rewriting history in real time, trying to twist their cruelty into benevolence. They didn't feel guilt. They felt fear. They knew that the person they had wronged now held the keys to the vault they had spent 2 decades trying to crack. We are family, Robert pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. That money, it belongs to us. To us, Rachel. You can overturn the will. You have the power. You're the judge. Just declare the cat sanctuary invalid. Say she was senile. We can split it. We can be a family again. Is that what you want? I asked quietly. To be a family. Yes. Ellen wept real tears, finally flowing though they were, tears of terror, not love. We've missed you so much. I looked at them, really looked at them, and felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just a cold, clinical pity. They were small people, hollowed out by greed. They had nothing left inside but an appetite. The court is not interested in your revisionist history, I said, and neither am I. I turned to the executor. Mr. Henderson, does the codicil mention any other witnesses? Henderson nodded. One, Your Honor, Mrs. Martha Higgins. At the sound of the name, my parents stiffened. They exchanged a glance of pure panic. Call Mrs. Higgins, I ordered. The doors opened and a small elderly woman walked in. She was dressed in a simple Sunday coat, clutching a handbag with both hands. I recognized her immediately, though she had aged. She was Agatha's maid, the woman who had polished the silver and dusted the portraits while my parents sat downstairs waiting for Agatha to die. She took the stand, swearing the oath on a Bible that looked well read. Mrs. Higgins, I said gently. You were employed by Agatha Thorne. For 30 years, Your Honor, she replied. Her voice was strong despite her frailty. She looked at me and her eyes softened. She knew. Did Agatha Thorne know about me? I asked. The question hung in the air. My parents held their breath. Oh, yes, Mrs. Higgins said. She turned to look directly at Robert and Ellen, her expression filled with a quiet, burning judgment. She knew everything. How? Robert whispered. Because she had ears, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Higgins said sharply. And because she hired a private investigator the week after you arrived. My parents gasped. She knew you had a daughter. Mrs. Higgins continued addressing the courtroom, but keeping her eyes on my parents. She knew you dumped her at a boarding house like a bag of trash. She showed me the report, photos of Rachel walking to school, photos of her at the library. Agatha followed her life from afar. I felt a lump form in my throat. The aunt I had been told hated children. She had been watching. Why didn't she say anything? Ellen asked, her voice trembling. Because she wanted to see what you would do, Mrs. Higgins said. She waited. Every Christmas she waited for you to bring Rachel home. Every birthday she watched the mailbox to see if you sent a card. You never did. Mrs. Higgins turned back to me. She paid for your law school, Your Honor. That anonymous donor scholarship you received, that was Agatha. She said you were the only one in this bloodline with a spine. I stared at her. The scholarship. The one that had saved me from drowning in debt, the one that had allowed me to focus on my studies and rise to the bench. I had always imagined it was some faceless corporate entity. It was Agatha. The woman my parents claimed was a monster had been my silent guardian. She hated them, Mrs. Higgins said, pointing a shaking finger at my parents. She found them repulsive. She called them vultures in cheap suits. She only kept them around because she said it was entertaining to watch them dance for crumbs they would never get. Robert sank into his chair, defeated. The truth crushed him. All those years of servitude, of faking smiles, of enduring insults, it had all been a game. Agatha had been playing them the whole time. She left the money to the cats, Mrs. Higgins concluded, because she told me that animals understand loyalty. And you too, she looked at my parents with withered scorn. You understand nothing but your own appetites. The truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket. My parents were not just disinherited. They were exposed. Their entire life's work, the great gamble of their existence, had been a joke. They had traded their daughter for a fortune, only to find out the fortune had been laughing at them all along. Ellen began to sob, a low, keening sound of utter ruin. Robert just stared at the floor, his hands hanging limp at his sides. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, a small, sad smile on her face. "She would have been proud of you, Rachel. She always said you were the one who would end it." I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom felt clearer now, scrubbed clean by the truth. The mystery of the anonymous donor was solved. The specter of the evil aunt was banished. All that remained was the final judgment. I looked down at the two people who had given me life, and then thrown it away. They were broken. They had debts they couldn't pay, a future they couldn't afford, and a past that condemned them. I held their fate in my hands. I could destroy them. I could leave them destitute, forced to work menial jobs into their 70s, living the hard, cold life they had forced upon me. It would be justice. It would be fair. But I was not just a victim anymore. I was a judge, and justice is not the same thing as revenge. "The court has heard the testimony," I announced, my voice steady. "I am ready to issue my ruling. Don't be shy to share your thoughts on the choices we make when power is finally in our hands. Your story might inspire our future episodes." I looked up at the seal of the Commonwealth mounted on the wall behind the witness stand. It was a heavy brass casting polished to a shine, depicting the scales of justice, balanced perfectly in the grip of a blindfolded woman. Justice and equity. Those were the words etched into the metal. Justice is cold. Justice is the mathematical application of the law. Under the strict interpretation of justice, Robert and Ellen Miller deserved nothing. They had signed away their rights to a daughter, and in turn, Agatha had signed away their rights to her fortune. Justice would see them evicted from the manor by sundown, their clothes packed in garbage bags, forced to navigate the winter of their lives with the same lack of resources they had forced upon a 9-year-old girl. But equity is different. Equity is about fairness. It is about the soul of the law rather than the letter. I looked down at them. My parents were huddled together not out of love, but out of the shared terror of the condemned. They were trembling. They were nearly 70 years old. They had no savings, no careers, and no home. If I banged the gavel now and upheld the will exactly as written, I would be sentencing them to destitution. I would be creating 2 homeless beggars. I felt a surge of dark power in my chest. It was intoxicating. It was the ancient lizard-brain desire for revenge. "Do it," a voice whispered. "Let them freeze. Let them know what it feels like to stand on a curb with nothing." I gripped the handle of the gavel until my fingers ached. If I destroyed them, I would be doing exactly what they had done to me. I would be perpetuating the cycle of cruelty. I would be proving that the blood running through my veins was just as poisoned as theirs. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old paper and lemon oil for the last time. I let the breath out slowly, and with it, I let go of the anger. It drained out of me, leaving behind a clear, cool stillness. "Stand up," I said. They rose shakily. My mother was weeping silently, her face a ruin of mascara and fear. My father looked gray like a man waiting for the firing squad. "The court finds," I began, my voice echoing in the hush, "that the last will and testament of Agatha Thorne is valid. The bequest to the Sunny Meadows Feline Sanctuary and Rescue stands. The bulk of the estate, the manor, the investments, the jewelry belongs to the cats." My father let out a low moan, his knees buckling slightly. "However," I continued, raising my voice to cut through his despair. He froze. "This court is also a court of equity," I said. While your motives were selfish and your treatment of your family was abhorrent, the fact remains that you provided 20 years of labor to the deceased. You maintained her home. You cooked her meals. You attended to her medical needs. I opened a new file on my desk. I am invoking the doctrine of quantum merit as much as is earned. I am ordering the creation of a constructive trust funded by the estate for the maintenance of Robert and Ellen Miller. Ellen's head snapped up. "A trust!" she gasped. "You mean we get the money?" "Do not mistake this for a windfall, Mrs. Miller," I said sharply. "This is not an inheritance. It is a stipend, a survival allowance." I looked at the executor. "Mr. Henderson, you will act as trustee. You will disburse to the petitioners the sum of $2,500 per month." "2,000," Robert stammered. But the estate is worth $3 million. We can't live on that. The heating bill for the manor alone is." "You will not be living in the manor," I interrupted. "The manor belongs to the cats. You will vacate the premises within 30 days. $2,500 is sufficient to rent a one-bedroom apartment in this county, buy groceries, and pay for basic utilities. It is enough to keep you warm and fed. It is not enough for country clubs, new cars, or designer handbags." "Rachel," my mother pleaded, her hands gripping the railing, "be reasonable. We are your parents. You can't expect us to live like poor people." "I expect you to live with dignity," I said, "something you denied me. I am ensuring you do not starve. I am ensuring you have a roof over your heads. That is more mercy than you showed me when you drove away into the snow." I leaned forward, locking eyes with them one last time. "This money comes with a condition. It is a spendthrift trust. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot sell your interest in it. If you attempt to leverage it for debt, the trust dissolves and you get nothing. Do you understand?" Robert looked at Ellen. They realized with crushing finality that their dreams of high society were dead. They would survive, yes. They would not die in the street, but they would live the rest of their lives in mediocrity, watching every penny forever reminded of the fortune they had lost. "We understand," Robert whispered. "Then it is so ordered," I said. I raised the gavel. It felt light in my hand now. Bang! The sound was final. It was the sound of a door closing on the past. "Court is adjourned." I didn't stay to watch them leave. I didn't want their tearful thanks, and I certainly didn't want their resentment. I retreated to my chambers, removed the heavy black robe, and hung it on the hook. Underneath, I was just Rachel. I put on my coat and walked out the back exit of the courthouse, bypassing the elevators where I might run into them. The air outside was crisp and cold. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking on the pavement. I thought about the money. I could have given them nothing. I could have watched them suffer. But Agatha had taught me better than that. She had taught me that true power isn't about what you can take. It's about what you can give, even to those who don't deserve it. By giving them that stipend, I hadn't just saved them from homelessness. I had saved myself. I had refused to let their cruelty turn me into a monster. I had broken the cycle. They would live out their days in a small apartment, bickering over the thermostat, forever trapped in their own smallness. And I stopped at the corner and looked back at the courthouse. It was a massive, imposing building full of ghosts and grievances. But for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel the weight of it. I had faced the people who broke me, and I had fixed myself. I had shown them mercy, not because they earned it, but because I was better than they were. That was the ultimate victory. That was the only inheritance that mattered. I turned my collar up against the wind and walked toward the subway. The city was noisy and chaotic, but to me it sounded like a symphony. It sounded like freedom. Don't be shy to share your thoughts on the choices we make. When power is finally in our hands, your story might inspire our future episodes. Rachel's choice to break the cycle of cruelty proves that true power often lies in mercy. Have you ever faced a similar crossroads with family or betrayal? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.